Well, hello and thank you so much for joining me again. I'm back on deck after a week or two of a fair bit of travelling around, and I'm back out here on the farm and looking forward to seeing what we can do here. Now, as you can see in the background, it's still the end of twilight, so I've got a little bit of time before we have to actually start shooting. But tonight what we're going to do is I'm going to show you through the steps required to get an animated time-lapse. And I'm going to be using my slider. It's about a 32-inch slider track, and I'll be putting the camera on that, finding a foreground object of interest, and then shooting where the Milky Way is coming up over there in the eastern sky. So I'm basically looking for three levels of movement. Firstly, the camera is moving across the time-lapse slider. Secondly, the stars are moving through the sky and the Milky Way itself is rising up in the sky. And thirdly, if there's a little bit of cloud around, and there actually is at the moment, I don't mind that, because that gives my third level of movement and it adds so much. I think a time-lapse with a bit of cloud, not too much, but a bit of cloud can be absolutely fantastic. So let's get on with it and I'll show you how I'm setting that up. Okay, well I found this awesome shed here, which I'm going to use as my foreground subject for my time-lapse. Now, there's trees behind the shed there, but I'm not too concerned about that because the Milky Way is going to rise up above and probably through those trees as the hours progress through the time-lapse. Now, just looking around, all the clouds have gone, so my three movement sources in my time-lapse is going to be reduced down to two. But never mind, that's okay. I'm still going to get a fairly good shot here. So now I'm just going to set up the time-lapse and hook up my lighting and we'll see how we go with that. All right, so here we are with the slider. Now this is something I bought, to be honest with you, on eBay. It's a very, very cheap slider, motorised slider, Andua brand. It's a 32-inch track, and basically you put the ball head on the top here, which I'll do now. Attach the camera, plug it in, program it. So I'll go through that in a minute and show you how that works. I'm going to just put it here where this bag is, about this close to the shed. I reckon that should be pretty right. Now I'm using these little tripods on the end to mount this off, to get it just that little bit off the ground, because I'm going to use a Nikon 14-24 f2.8 lens on this shot, and I just don't want it too close to the ground. I do want it low to the ground, but not too close. So these small little tripods, I've got the Manfrotto plate underneath here, work beautifully. Now the ball head, again, it's got the Manfrotto tripod plate, so I can fit my camera on there. So I've just got that nice and tight on there. And yep, so I'm ready to plug in all the electricals now. Okay, now as far as the electricals, how this thing works, it uses a standard Sony NPF battery, which I've got heaps of these and I use them for a lot of different pieces of equipment. So this is the control device, and the battery just clips into it like so, which is good. The battery life is very, very good. So it'll last plenty of time. It'll last heaps of hours. So that's important for a time-lapse, that's for sure. And it has the ability to program time and interval for the camera. So I've done a fair bit of experimenting, and to be absolutely honest, the instructions that come with this slider are not worth the paper they're written on. It's very difficult to work out. I've looked up a few tutorials on YouTube and online, and that's helped me a fair bit, but I've had to do a fair bit of trial and error, to be honest. So I guess when you're talking about these cheap sliders on eBay, you get what you pay for. The thing works fine, but as far as the setting up of it, it's quite it's fairly daunting. But anyway, we'll go through it now. Okay, now the first thing we need to do is set a start and end point. So what we do is we push this slider across to the start, where we want it to start. So I'm just doing that now. Okay, so when we get the carriage to the end, we go back to our controller and we set the end point. So we click on that, push the carriage across to the other side, and do the exact same thing we just did and wait until it gets to the other end, and we set the end point. And so at this point we do a test and we make sure that the carriage is going to go across from one side to the other. And I normally make sure that it will, when it gets to the other end, actually bounce back and return. So rather than just come up and hard hit on the end, it has the ability to make sure that it softens at the end and then goes back the other way like that. So that's exactly what I want it to do, and it's done that quite nicely, so that's good. Okay, so what I'm doing now is going to time-lapse mode, and I've already preset all of these parameters inside the device, but one thing I will do is change the amount of photos here. It says 400, I'm going to take that up to 500. I reckon that should do us, because what I've tried to do is calculate how long this thing is going to take to get from one end to the other, because I don't really want it to go back again. So actually I'll make it 520 just to be sure. That's it. And I've got it set to auto loop, which is fine, because if it does go to the end, it will start going back the other way. But I'll just work that out. So I'm going to be shooting with a 15-second shutter speed with a 5-second interval. And if you look at the settings I've got here on the screen, it looks quite weird. It's got a time lapse 4 seconds, stop time 23 seconds. That doesn't really add up to 15 and 5-second interval, but I've done the testing and that's what I reckon will work, because what happens is that the carriage stops and then takes a shot and then moves. And I've got to make sure that those parameters give it enough time to take the shot in the time that it's actually stopped and not take the shot when it's moving. Sound complicated? Well, it probably was, and it took me a fair while to work it out. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plug the controller into the hand device here, and the other end is going to go into my D750, which is the camera I'm going to be using to shoot this time-lapse tonight. Okay, so the settings on the D750, you have to make sure that you set the camera to the settings that you want rather than put it into bulb mode, as a lot of external devices need to be in bulb mode, but not in this instance. So I'm setting the camera at f2.8 with a 15-second shutter speed and an ISO. I'm going to set the ISO to 3200. So that should be good for what we're doing. Okay, so just to summarize what we're doing here, I'm taking 520 shots and it's going to send the camera across this slide right across from one side to the other. And I estimate that's going to take about 3 hours from here. I've set the camera to shoot at 15-second shutter speed with an interval of 5 seconds, I'm hoping, in the controller. ISO 3200 and the aperture is f2.8. So all I need to do now is frame up, focus, and I'm ready to go. All right, so the next job I want to do is set up a little constant video light, low-level lighting, inside the shed to just give it a little bit of warm glow that'll be on for the full duration of the shot. So I've got to make sure I've got a good long life battery, and which I have on this Z6 video light. So let's go and do that now. All right, well, there's no rocket science with any of this. What I'm doing is simply putting the light down on a low spot here inside the shed, just to give a little bit of a warm glow up onto that wall. And I particularly like the corrugated iron when it's lit from a little bit of an angle on the side. So I'm just going to sit it here on a very low level, and I reckon that should be just about enough. All right, so the only thing I have to do now is put another light just back down here to shine on the outside side of the fence and the gate here, because I don't like just having particularly dark silhouettes. I'd prefer to have just a little bit of feature in my foreground. So I'm just going to put the light down here. We'll see how that goes. Again, very, very dull. Okay, well, the time lapse is down there doing its thing. It's going to be there for probably the next 3 hours or so shooting away. So I've got plenty of time to kill. I might just go back and put my feet up, have a cuppa, maybe even a bit of a rest. I've had a big few weeks, so yeah, I'll just go and do that, I think. And I'll show you guys later how it's going. Okay, yeah, well that's good. So I've stopped that at 500 shots. Now, it's probably got about an inch or so to go before it gets to the end, but I'm happy with 500 shots because 500 divided by 25 frames per second, which is the video frame rate that I'll be using, is exactly 20 seconds. So that makes sense to me, a 20-second time lapse. So now it's just a matter of packing up and hitting the road, and when I get this processed, you guys are going to see it. So look forward to that. Okay, now I want to stop the video right here and explain something that happened whilst I was recording this time lapse. Silly me, I forgot to fully charge the battery before I started. So what happens, about 3/4 of the way through, the battery started flashing on my camera. I knew it was about to die. So I had no choice. I had to stop the time lapse, replace the battery and put it back in. And I thought, well, I've probably done that without moving anything and no one will notice. But unfortunately, when you see the video about 3/4 of the way through, there is a jump in the time lapse. So silly me, it's my fault. Lack of preparation strikes again. The time lapse is still great, but that's the reason when you see that, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Okay, well it's just clocked over 3:08 AM. I'm really tired and I need to get back in to bed, I reckon. Really happy with how that's gone tonight. 500 shots. I had to come out a few times just to check and make sure. I guess I just didn't trust the mechanics of this machine. But 500 shots, and it took about that 3-hour period, which was pretty much what I was expecting and what I was hoping for. So another night out here under the stars comes to a close. I'm really pleased with how it's all gone tonight. It's been a fantastic night. Maybe if there had been just a few wispy clouds going through, that would have increased the dynamics of the shot, but never mind. I'm happy with what I've got, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys during our next adventure out under the stars. Really appreciate your support. Love to hear your comments down below, and I'll catch up with you next time.